has claimed that 48 Iranian leaders were killed in the ongoing U.S.-Israeli military campaign against Iran, describing the operation as a major success. In an interview with Fox News, the U.S. president said, "Nobody can believe the success we're having. 48 leaders are gone in one shot." The joint campaign has focused heavily on Iran's political, military, and intelligence leadership, what military analysts call a decapitation strategy. Iranian state media says 43 members of the country's security forces were killed in a bombing of a border regiment headquarters in Mahran, near the Iraqi border. Tehran had blamed the attack on the United States and Israel and has vowed severe retaliation. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that strikes on Tehran will intensify in the coming days, signaling further escalation. Speaking from the rooftop of Israel's military headquarters in Tel Aviv, Netanyahu acknowledged Israeli casualties, saying the country was paying a price, but that the outcome of the war was not in doubt.
Our forces are now striking in the heart of Tehran with increasing intensity, which will grow even stronger in the coming days.
You, just you, building your app on Base 44.
These are painful days. Yesterday, here in Tel Aviv, and now in Beit Shemesh, we lost precious people. My heart goes out to the families, and on behalf of you all, the citizens of Israel, I send wishes for a speedy recovery to the wounded. We are also bringing into this campaign the assistance of the United States, my friend, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and the U.S. military. This combination of forces enables us to do what I have long hoped to do for 40 years, to strike the terror regime decisively.
A report by Axios has now said that the Feb 28th strikes were planned months in advance. Trump and Netanyahu began discussing a follow-up attack on Iran as early as late December during a meeting at Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. Iran's crackdown on protesters and fresh intelligence assessments about nuclear activity shifted Washington's calculus. Reports suggest Trump nearly ordered strikes on January 14, but instead authorized a major U.S. military buildup in the Middle East while planning a joint operation with Israel. And even as strike planning continued, the United States pursued nuclear talks with Iran. U.S. envoys Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff attended negotiations in Geneva just days before the strikes. Officials say the talks were genuine, not a ruse, but expectations for a breakthrough were low. It was a narrow window. After the second round of talks, U.S. and Israeli officials reportedly concluded that February 28th presented a rare opportunity for Khamenei to meet senior aides in a single location. That window became the trigger, as by then, diplomacy had already collapsed under the weight of fundamental disagreements. With the killing of Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei now creating a leadership vacuum and both sides launching missile and drone attacks, fears are growing that the conflict could escalate into a prolonged regional war. A synagogue was hit in Israel by Iranian missiles, killing nearly 10 and wounding over 50.
At least 9 people have been killed after an Iranian ballistic missile struck the Israeli city of Beit Shemesh, approximately 30 kilometers west of Jerusalem. Emergency services say around 20 others were injured in the blast. Israel's National Emergency Medical Service, Magen David Adom, confirmed that its medics are treating multiple casualties at the scene. The death toll continues to soar. Among the injured is a young girl reported to be in serious condition.
This is the result of the Iranian regime ballistic terror. As you can see, the ballistic missiles was aimed at a civilian neighborhood. This is a civilian building. We had children inside this building, young children. We had elderly people in this building. One of these elderly people was a woman, an elderly woman, and she lived with a Philippine caregiver. The Iranian regime ballistic missiles murder this Philippine caregiver. But this is not only happening here in Israel. The Iranian regime is attacking the entire region. 8 countries, I repeat, 8 countries in the region were attacked by ballistic missiles of Iran. Not only Israel, Arab countries are targeted by Iranian regime missiles. And we say it very clear. We don't have any fight, any quarrel with the Iranian people. The only objective, the only quarrel is the Iranian regime murderous attacks.
Most of those killed had rushed into a public shelter seeking protection as sirens warned of incoming Iranian missiles. Authorities say the majority were inside when a direct ballistic strike hit the structure. While shelters protect against debris and near misses, officials say they cannot survive a direct impact of that magnitude. The Israeli military said search and rescue forces are operating at the impact site, alongside medical teams and a helicopter for casualty evacuation. Officials say efforts have focused on locating any additional victims trapped under debris and providing urgent medical care. The strike marks a deadly escalation as missile exchanges between Iran and Israel intensify. Beit Shemesh, a residential city, now bears the scars of the expanding confrontation, with families caught in the crossfire of a rapidly widening conflict. As emergency crews continue their operations, the human toll of the escalating hostilities is mounting, underscoring the growing danger facing civilians on both sides of the crisis.
So peace and love, everyone. I hope you're having a good day. Peace. Sorry, y'all. We're moving some things in the background, but I hope everybody's having a good day. It's nice today on Sunday. We're just going to go over a couple of things. Of course, everything that's happening right now with Trump. I've heard a few things in the YouTube streets, and just when people are having this conversation about Trump, I didn't know that it kind of changed to be this Republican, and a Republican president can do no wrong. Why is that? It seems like no one's even talking about what's really happening. And then we're going to talk about some other things that be happening in these YouTube streets. But good day, you guys. And I do want to go to this next video. Give me 1 second. So I was hearing someone say, that everything could possibly be fake. They don't believe anything in the news. If this is really going on in Iran, where are they attacking the actual American bases, military bases in Iran? What?
Curious about Ozempic or Wegovy, but not sure if your insurance covers it? That's where Bro comes in. Because let's be real.
Iran has intensified its retaliatory campaign across the Middle East, launching missile and drone strikes on American military targets and allied countries. In the latest, the Iranian military once again targeted the United States naval base in Bahrain. The footage showed Iranian missiles hitting the headquarters of the U.S. Fifth Fleet Naval Base. Although interceptors attempted to down Iranian missiles over Bahrain, they failed. Bahrain International Airport was also a target. An Iranian drone directly targeted the American military installation at the airport. Bahrain's Interior Ministry said the international airport was targeted with a drone, quote, resulting in material damage without loss of life, end quote. It also said authorities were securing the area. The U.S. Embassy in Bahrain warned on February 28th that it considered high-rise buildings unsafe. The U.S.'s Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar also came under the barrage of Iranian ballistic missiles. An online video shows Patriot air defense systems working to intercept the Iranian missiles tonight. It showed the successful interception of several targets, lighting up the night sky. Earlier, on February 2, 8 people were injured in Qatar after Iranian missile shrapnel landed in multiple locations across the country, following a barrage of Iranian missiles that Qatar said its air defenses intercepted. Al Jazeera reported citing authorities. Qatar's Ministry of Interior said 66 missiles were fired, and authorities received 114 reports of shrapnel falling nationwide. Qatar's Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemned the attack by Iran, calling it a reckless and irresponsible, as well as a flagrant violation of sovereignty and an escalation threatening regional stability. Meanwhile, Iran also targeted Israeli neighbor Jordan. A fire broke out on the streets after an Iranian missile strike, according to reports. On February 28th, the Jordanian armed forces intercepted and shot down 2 ballistic missiles. The military also said its air force was conducting aerial sorties to protect the kingdom's skies and safeguard its sovereignty.
Shocking footage now emerging from the Gulf, claiming to capture a high-speed Iranian ballistic missile making its way toward a major U.S. military installation, and Patriot air defense systems failing to stop it. In this clip, 3 Patriot air defense missiles fire in rapid succession, each attempting to intercept the incoming warhead. But against expectations, all 3 interceptors failed to connect. The warhead continues its deadly trajectory, slicing through the sky as defenses scramble. The Iranian ballistic missile warhead targeted the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, a key hub for U.S. operations in the Middle East. Al Udeid houses thousands of U.S. and coalition personnel, along with critical command and logistics elements. The base has been central to American military efforts across the region. Al Udeid also came under Iranian attack last year in response to Israel and America's strikes that killed several officials and damaged nuclear sites in Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow. Defense officials are now assessing damage and personnel safety as tensions remain dangerously high following a series of retaliatory strikes between Iran, the United States, and allied forces.
So as you can see, this is very real. Things are happening right now. There's fights, missiles going back and forth. I think there have been rumors of hits in Dubai. I've seen some of the footage. I'm not quite sure if it's really Dubai that the footage is from, but definitely there's been talk of it already reaching Dubai as well. So where is this fake? Why are people saying that there's nothing happening in the background? This is just an attack to be like on Trump? Like what? So and I'm not really for, against, or anything like that. I don't believe in politics altogether. But my question is, what are people thinking that is actually happening right now? Do people even believe that this is growing to a World War III, or if this is just something that will calm down in the future? It's definitely been something that has been rising or on the horizon for over 5 years now between Iran, US, and Israel relations. But when people are talking about Trump, all they're talking about is him being a Republican and they're Republican and how horrible the Democrats are. What are you talking about? We're talking about a potential World War III right now, and you're talking about whether Republicans are good. But I did want to also go into, because there's a lot going on that people just don't seem to be aware of. Before we get into the past and really seeing how this correlates with the First World Wars, I do want us to continue a little bit and seeing what is happening right now.
Dollars if there was a sustained closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Remember, we haven't seen oil prices that high since you go back to sort of the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia war. And why do I mention that? Because remember what happened to gas prices. We saw them go above $5 a gallon in some places. Now, this is an extreme scenario, but that is why the Strait of Hormuz is so important, because so much oil flows through there every single day.
Yeah, Kelly, and already the ship tracking platform Marine Traffic is showing a 70% drop in vessel traffic through that region. For the point you've just made, shippers saying, you know what, let's avoid the conflict at the moment. That could have its own knock-on effect. What do you think then is the real likelihood of Iran choosing to close the strait altogether? It's already seeing this drop in traffic.
So the good news is this is pretty unlikely for a complete and sustained closure. Number one, Iran has threatened to do this many times in the past, and they've never followed through with it. Number two, I mean, you've been talking about it your entire show. There is a huge military presence in the area. So if they were to try and do something like this, you would expect that to be swiftly rectified. And number three, this would be self-destructive for Iran. Remember, Iran's revenue mainly comes from the oil that it is willing to sell to countries like China that will buy that sanctioned oil. And so if they cut that off for other countries and other buyers, they're also doing that to themselves. Now, of course, this is an existential moment for Iran. They might choose to go forward with that. But everyone that I'm talking to is saying that is an unlikely extreme scenario. But what you will see is shipping companies say, I just don't want to go through there, or insurers, which will hike up the price to insure that oil. And all of those things do flow down to the price of oil. And when you do have oil traders looking at the situation, it doesn't mean that they're not going to get nervous that this might happen, even though it's unlikely.
Yeah, really important details to consider. Kelly O'Grady, thank you so much.
China is arming Iran with attack drones, advanced missiles, and electronic warfare systems, right as the United States builds up its military presence for potential strikes against Tehran. Could this be the spark that ignites a new Middle East conflict? The tension comes after the 12-day war between Israel and Iran in June 2025, which left Iran's air defenses and nuclear infrastructure severely damaged. Tehran is now scrambling to rebuild its military capabilities, and China has stepped in to fill the gap. Beijing has already delivered kamikaze drones, also known as loitering munitions, designed for precision strikes. At the same time, China is supplying air defense systems like the HQ-16 and HQ-17AE and negotiating deals for supersonic anti-ship missiles and hypersonic glide vehicles. Analysts warn these weapons could threaten U.S. aircraft carriers, stealth jets, and naval operations in the Arabian Sea and Persian Gulf. China's support isn't just drones and missiles. Reports indicate Iran is receiving strategic radars capable of detecting stealth aircraft like the U.S. B-2 bomber, plus electronic warfare systems to jam F-35 jets. Chinese satellites are also providing navigation and timing for Iran's missile systems, dramatically improving precision. This marks China's largest military aid to Iran yet, signaling a deepening strategic partnership that could directly challenge U.S. influence in the region. The U.S. is watching closely. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has highlighted Iran's pursuit of intercontinental ballistic missiles, while American forces have been deployed across the region in a show of force. President Trump is scheduled to meet Xi Jinping in late March 2026. While trade will dominate, China's arming of Iran could complicate talks and increase tensions, with experts warning a single misstep could trigger a wider conflict. With U.S.-Iran diplomacy stalled, Chinese support emboldening Iran, and advanced weapons now in play, the Middle East is on a knife's edge. A sudden escalation could destabilize the region, disrupt energy markets, and pull in global powers. Is China deliberately escalating tensions, or is Iran simply defending itself? Could the next few weeks determine whether diplomacy holds or whether a new war erupts?
Subscribe to One India and never miss an update. Download the One India app now.
So that's China. Now we're going to get into Russia. But peace, Brother Nazir, Mike, Savage, Saint, OTK. Peace, y'all. Thank y'all for tuning in. So I just want y'all to see Russia's response real quick before we get into really this luminous forecoming or foreshadowing of what is or could happen. And then we can go into a little bit of how even the past world wars came to be or started.
Russia has issued a blistering condemnation after the United States, and Israel launched airstrikes on Iranian territory early Friday morning. In a strongly worded statement, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation described the operation as a premeditated and unprovoked act of armed aggression against a sovereign UN member state. Moscow says the scale and nature of the military political preparations leave no doubt that the attack was planned in advance and carried out in violation of international law.
The scale and nature of the military, political, and propaganda preparations preceding this reckless step, including the deployment of a large military group of the USA in the region, leave no doubt that we are talking about a premeditated and unprovoked act of armed aggression against a sovereign and independent member state of the UN, in violation of the fundamental principles and norms of international law.
The Kremlin has framed the strikes as reckless escalation, warning that the region is being pushed toward what it calls a humanitarian, economic, and possibly radiological catastrophe. Russia argues that bombing nuclear facilities operating under safeguards of the International Atomic Energy Agency is unacceptable and risks undermining the global non-proliferation regime anchored in the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. According to Moscow, the American-Israeli tandem is ignoring the consequences for regional stability.
Washington and Tel Aviv have once again embarked on a dangerous adventure, which is rapidly bringing the region closer to a humanitarian, economic, and possibly radiological catastrophe. The aggressors' intentions are clear, and they are openly declaring them: to destroy the constitutional order and eliminate the leadership of an undesirable state that refused to submit to military dictatorship and hegemony.
In one of its strongest accusations, Russia says the responsibility for any chain reaction of violence will lie entirely with the United States and Israel. The statement warns of unpredictable consequences and a spiral of escalation that could engulf the wider Middle East. Moscow argues that such actions could ultimately encourage countries across the region to pursue stronger deterrent capabilities, calling on the international community, including the United Nations, to deliver an objective and uncompromising assessment. Russia has demanded an immediate return to political and diplomatic negotiations. The Kremlin says it remains ready to assist in finding peaceful solutions based on international law, mutual respect, and balance of interests. But with military strikes underway and tensions surging, the warning from Moscow is clear. The Middle East may now be standing at the edge of a far more dangerous escalation. Russia has reacted sharply to the reported US-Israel strikes on Iran. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev accused Washington of disguising military intent behind diplomatic engagement. In a blistering message, he questioned the credibility of American negotiations with Tehran.
The peacemaker has once again shown his true colors. All the negotiations with Iran are a cover-up operation. No one ever doubted that. No one really wanted to negotiate anything significant anyway.
Medvedev's remarks signal Moscow's deep distrust of Washington's role in West Asia. By calling diplomacy a facade, he suggests the talks were merely strategic camouflage before strikes. The statement reinforces Russia's narrative that the United States uses negotiations as leverage, not resolution. He then reframed the crisis as a civilizational contest, invoking history to underline endurance and patience.
The question is, who has more patience to wait for the inglorious end of their enemy? The USA has only existed for 249 years. The Persian Empire was founded more than 2,500 years ago. Let's see in about 100 years.
The message is unmistakable. Moscow is aligning rhetorically with Tehran and portraying this confrontation as a long-term geopolitical struggle rather than a short-term military escalation. As tensions deepen in West Asia, Russia is signaling that it sees the battle not just in bombs and missiles, but in endurance and history.
So yeah, I haven't seen a plethora of people talking about the potentials of World War III, but I agree, Brother Nazir, it's both. But I'm just like, how can we not be talking about that? This could be a World War III in our lifetime that's going down right now, and people are still making this about Republicans or Democrats or Kamala Harris being in office. No one wanted Kamala Harris in office, but this is serious. This does affect all the population, and we have to talk about, it in a logical sense, not in a sense, oh, it's definite, it's just a clear division or winner or anything like that. We'd have to really talk about the implications of what's going on when there is an assassination of an important figure and how that has manipulated even world wars in the past. But I did want us to get into what Trump said when he was saying, as far as the leader, the Iranian leader being killed.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Casey Stiegel. The president and Israeli officials say a joint attack on Iran early this morning killed the country's reigning supreme leader and some of his family. Tonight, the New York Times reports that one of the Ayatollah's daughters, his son-in-law, and one of his grandchildren are among the dead. Now, President Trump says that the assassination now gives the Iranian people their, quote, greatest chance to take their country back. The Israeli military says it targeted multiple Iranian leaders in the opening attacks. The Iranian military is threatening a, quote, severe and regret-inducing punishment. That included the compound that served as the supreme leader's living quarters and offices. Satellite images appear to show significant damage to the complex. Iran, within the last few hours, officially confirmed the death through state media. Ali Khamenei has been near or at the top of the political power structure since the beginning of the Islamic Revolution. Khamenei was president of Iran from 1981 to 1989. The 86-year-old has been the supreme leader of that country since 1989. More on the important history for better context in a moment. But first, today's escalation. This is brand new video released not long ago from U.S. Central Command. Fox News reports the U.S. carried out nearly 900 strikes in the first 12 hours of this operation. More than 200 people were killed in Iran and nearly 800 more were injured in the initial salvo. Iran fired hundreds of missiles at U.S. facilities in Arab nations in response. Now, so far, there have been no reports of American casualties, and the damage to U.S. infrastructure is minor. The operation, though, could last several weeks. This evening, the Israeli military says it began a fresh series of strikes targeting Iran's missile and aerial defense systems. President Trump has not made any new public statements tonight, but here is what he shared shortly after the initial attack today.
We're going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated. We're going to annihilate their Navy. We're going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world.
Here is a look inside the Situation Room at the White House during the strikes, which the Trump administration has code-named Operation Epic Fury. Now, we just heard moments ago that the head of Iran's Revolutionary Guard was also killed in that attack. The president, the vice president, Trump's chief of staff, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio were all in that room. Rubio canceled a planned trip to Israel that was set to start on Monday. We want to take you live now. This is a live look at Tel Aviv, Israel, where it is a little after 5 a.m. Sirens have been going off periodically all night there. Iran's military has threatened additional strikes, which could happen at any time, targeting Israel and United States Mideast bases. Now, earlier today, at least one missile penetrated Israel's so-called Iron Dome defense system, causing damage to buildings in the city. At least one person was killed. Here, in fact, is a better look at that damage right in the heart of Tel Aviv. This video shot by Fox News Channel's Trey Yingst, who is reporting there on the ground. First responders have been digging through the rubble of the strike site, searching for the injured. Israeli media is now reporting at least 20 people were hurt. Many were treated on the scene, but at least one person said to be in critical condition. Dubai and the neighboring United Arab Emirates also struck by Iran's retaliatory fire. Debris from an intercepted Iranian missile hit a luxury hotel there, causing an explosion and then a massive fire. Witness video showing the flames from the posh hotel. At least 4 injuries were reported. Iranian forces also targeting Abu Dhabi, killing 1 person.
So yeah, I mean, Trump used a lot of big words. We're gonna annihilate them. They're gonna be demolished, and perhaps they are gonna be. But to act like everything else is impenetrable and nothing is going on, there's no bombings, people aren't dying in American bases. That's not true. What's happening now is they're going to war, and I agree completely, brother Nazir. Like, this now has made everyone like into blind patriots, especially in this community. But whether you're like FBA, Aboriginal, American Indian, any form of Americans, it's like this blind patriotism that means like, oh, we're Republicans, and not knowing the difference between the U.S. government has always been corrupt and opposed to our lineage in particular, versus what it just means to have the American lineage. So it's like the U.S. government can do no wrong, and we can't actually see what's going on or talk about what's going on in the news, especially if it brings any kind of negativity to the United States. But our lineage isn't tied to the United States. Like, we have to be clear on what's going on when these things are going down. And I think there's just too many conspiracies, too much war isn't real. None of this is really happening when this really is going down. This is really happening as we speak. And the First World War started with an assassination. So let's go ahead and go back, take a little bit back, and so we can know what went on before to see what's forthcoming for all of us.
It was called the War to End All Wars. Unfortunately, World War I didn't deliver on that promise. It was, however, the first time in the history of planet Earth that nations from around the world fought in a single war. It started with an assassination and a series of questionable decisions. We can point fingers and play the blame game, but really there is no single person or country that holds all of the responsibility. Could the war that killed millions have been prevented? Most definitely. Let's take a look at what caused the Great War, explore how it could have been prevented, and learn how to not repeat the mistakes of the past. World War I lasted from 1914 to 1918 and included countries in Europe, Russia, the United States, and countries in the Middle East. The 2 main sides of the war were the Central Powers, which consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, who fought against the Allied powers of France, Britain, Russia, Portugal, and Japan. Later in the war, the United States would also join the side of the Allies. But what happened? Why did all of these nations get involved in one of the most disastrous wars in history? Let's explore the mechanisms and missteps that led to the First World War. Although there were many players in World War I, the conflict started with Serbia and Austria-Hungary. The Serbian government was eager to claim more territory for the nation. Serbia was already in a state of aggression due to the Balkan Wars that just ended a year before the start of World War I. After the Balkan War, Serbian nationalists wanted to liberate the South Slavs of Austria-Hungary, thus unifying the Slavic peoples under one nation. The extreme nationalism led to the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. At 11:15 a.m. on June 28, 1914, Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, Duchess of Hohenberg, were shot to death in Sarajevo, Bosnia by Gavrilo Princip. Princip was a Serbian extremist who had connections to a secret society called the Black Hand. The assassination was the match that ignited the First World War. However, there were many other factors that led to the powder keg that would explode. Should the assassination of Franz Ferdinand have led to an all-out war? Probably not. There's more to the story here. In the shadows lurked Kaiser Wilhelm II, who may as well be much to blame as Gavrilo Princip in starting World War I. Wilhelm II was the leader of Germany, and he was diabolical. Kaiser Wilhelm II wanted a strong Germany that dominated Europe both economically and militarily in strength. He did not want Russia or Great Britain to have more influence and power than he did. Therefore, Wilhelm II allied himself and Germany with Austria-Hungary. He knew that if Austria-Hungary went to war with Serbia, then Russia would come to Serbia's aid. This would drag Russia's ally France into the conflict. We'll examine later why Wilhelm wanted this.
Bob told us that they were going to test the alien craft that night.
War to happen so badly. Kaiser Wilhelm II secretly funded Austria-Hungary in their endeavor to suppress Serbia. He allowed Germany to give Austria-Hungary a carte blanche or blank check. Basically, Germany would fund the war effort using their wealthy economy to ensure Austria-Hungary came out on top. With the assassination of their heir and the backing of Germany, Austria-Hungary felt empowered to start their war with Serbia. They sent Serbia an ultimatum with such harsh terms that it was impossible to accept. There was only one alternative: war. But there was more to the story. The decisions of Austria-Hungary and Germany were clearly geared toward war. It's undeniable that World War I started because of these aggressive decisions, but could the whole conflict have been avoided if other countries had made better decisions? Were there strings being pulled behind the scenes by the countries on both sides of the war? Let's find out. First, let's take a look at the Triple Entente nations, which consisted of a secret pact between Great Britain, France, and Russia. Could any of these nations have secretly wanted a world war to heighten their power? Could there have been a secret plot by the Allies to set up a war they would eventually win? Russia is, and always has been, a large, powerful nation. What could Russia gain from a war against the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy? At first glance, Russia's role in World War I seems to be based around supporting their ally of Serbia. But as we look closer, it seems that Russia's alliance only played a superficial role in their decisions to go to war. In fact, Russia barely even tried to find a diplomatic solution to prevent the conflict. Instead, they immediately started to deploy troops and ramp up military production once Austria-Hungary showed aggression towards Serbia. It would seem Russia had no intentions on working out the conflict diplomatically. History shows it was Russia, not Germany, that mobilized its military first. Russia may have wanted the war to claim more territory and power for the nation, but there was another player on the Triple Entente side who may have played a behind-the-scenes role in starting World War I. France did not make any outwardly aggressive moves in the months that led to the outbreak of war, but they were making secret strategic moves. France may be the only reason that Russia prepared for war in the first place. During talks of what was to be done about the Central Powers, France offered Russia its own blank check. The stipulation was that Russia would help Europeanize the Austrian-Hungary Empire. France had an idea of what this part of the world should look like, and rather than entering directly into a conflict, they funded the Russian military to start a war that they could benefit from. France encouraged Russia's aggression toward Austria-Hungary and Germany. French leaders seemed to not like the idea of having a powerful nation of Germany right next door. If Germany was focusing on fighting Russia on the Eastern Front, it would provide France with the opportunity to either protect itself or launch an uncontested invasion into Germany from the Western Front. It would seem that things did not play out exactly as France predicted because of Germany's deployment of troops to fight on both the Russian and French fronts simultaneously. Now, if the shady actions of France leading up to the start of World War I surprised you, then what Great Britain did may shock you even more. Britain was a dominant force in colonization and had control of the seas with their powerful navy. Would they benefit from an all-out war in Europe? Germany was becoming powerful, both economically and militarily. Britain knew that this was a big threat to their empire. In the eyes of Great Britain's leaders, the world wasn't big enough for both a German empire and a British empire. If Germany continued on the path it was headed, Britain's global dominance of the seas and financial system would be threatened and perhaps lost. This was unacceptable to the leaders of Great Britain. These notions of loss of dominance may have driven Great Britain to stay out of diplomatic talks and instead encourage Russian aggression. It would seem that at the time, Great Britain had an inferiority complex when it came to Germany. They had failed to mediate during the Balkan Wars, and they refused to mediate during the lead-up to World War I. The thought process may have been that the more conflicts Germany was a part of, the more likely they were to be weakened. Great Britain had clearly won the naval arm race by 1910. It just seemed that it wasn't enough. They were still living in fear of Germany's threats, and it would appear rightfully so as history showed over the next several decades. It needs to be said that if Great Britain wanted to prevent war, they should have contributed to the mediation discussions. The fact that they actively avoided the mediation shows Britain might have had other motives, especially if war meant a weakened Germany. History is written by the victors. Therefore, history textbooks tend to attribute most of, if not all of, the blame for World War I to Austria-Hungary and Germany. You have to wonder who would be blamed if the outcome of the war was reversed. We discussed how the nations of the Triple Entente were by no means free of blame for the start of the conflict, but let's take a closer look at the motives and actions of the Triple Alliance, which was the secret pact between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Let's find out if they really are to blame, like so many textbooks say. Other than retaliation, what was Austria-Hungary after? In a word, territory. Austria-Hungary wanted to add more land and people to its already large empire. More land equals more resources and more men for their military. Austria-Hungary had its sights set on Serbia for a while. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand allowed them to perfect the opportunity to make their dreams of taking over Serbian lands a reality. Austria-Hungary's desires were made clear when they offered an obscene ultimatum to Serbia. The ultimatum itself was delivered on July 23, 1914. It required Serbia to accept an Austro-Hungarian inquiry into the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. The inquiry would be conducted solely by Austria-Hungarian investigators. Serbia also needed to suppress all anti-Austrian propaganda and eliminate any terrorist or extremist organizations within its borders. The leaders of Austria-Hungary demanded that an answer to the ultimatum be sent within 48 hours. However, the ambassador to Serbia delivered the ultimatum and immediately left the country to return back to Austria-Hungary. He already knew what was going to happen next. There was no way that Serbia would accept the ultimatum. This meant war. The ultimatum served one purpose. Austria-Hungary knew Serbia would never accept their terms, but they also knew if they attacked without warning, it would make Serbia look like the victim. By sending the ultimatum, it pushed the burden of avoiding war onto the Serbian government. This way, Austria-Hungary created the illusion of giving Serbia a chance to stop the war. When they didn't, Serbia would look like the bad guy. But the ridiculous ultimatum did not stand up to the test of history, and Austria-Hungary is still seen as the aggressor. Really, what it came down to was that Austria-Hungary wanted to control more territory in the Balkan region. They needed a reason to go to war with Serbia to secure that land, and they found it in the assassination of their Archduke. Was the assassination a reason to conduct an all-out war? Probably not, but it was sufficient enough reason for the Austria-Hungary government at the time. However, none of this would have been possible without one key player, and I'm sure you can guess what's coming next. Germany. In the eyes of many historians, Germany is to blame for the First World War. Why was Germany considered the most responsible in a conflict they did not directly start? It's mostly because they alone had the power to stop the war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. All they needed to do was withdraw their blank check, and Austria-Hungary would not have the financial ability to support a war with Serbia. This would have kept Austria-Hungary in check, and they would have never issued their ultimatum. Germany also knew that if Austria-Hungary went to war with Serbia, Russia and France would both get pulled in. It was almost as if Germany needed to find a way to declare war on their competitors in the region without doing it themselves. Germany could never just outright declare war on the other nations, or they would risk unifying the entire continent of Europe against them. But by strategically destabilizing the Balkans, they could goad Russia and therefore France into a war with their ally, thus allowing Germany to start a war to suit their needs. The other reason that Germany wanted war was because it had peaked as a nation. If Germany allowed the rest of Europe to catch up, they would lose power and prestige. This upset no one more than Kaiser Wilhelm II, who was an angry militaristic autocrat. He believed that he was predestined by God to lead his country to greatness. He hated diplomats and maintained that the only way to ensure Germany's spot of power was through war. He knew it was now or never if Germany was going to become the predominant world power. When a power-hungry autocrat is in charge of one of the world's most wealthy and armed nations, there's only one outcome: war. In the end, World War I was caused by many different factors and countries. There's not just one person or nation to blame. However, some are more responsible than others. If the leaders of Europe were less hungry for power and more willing to sit down and negotiate, the war could have been avoided. Make no mistake, World War I was not unavoidable, but the leaders in charge saw war as a desirable outcome, or were forced into it by their allies, a situation that would repeat itself again 21 years later. If you're interested in more World War I information, check out 50 insane World War I facts that will shock you. Or if you want to know how World War I and World War II stack up, watch World War I versus World War II. How do they compare?
This video is brought to you by Captivating History. World War II as the most devastating and in most cases the cruelest conflict in human history. If we look at it from our current perspective, it seems unthinkable that anyone would intentionally launch such a devastating war. It may surprise you to hear that it was just as shocking to many people at the time as well. Parts of the world, Europe in particular, had yet to recover from the horrors of the First World War. Millions had vowed that they would never get sucked into another global conflict, and yet, 2 decades later, it happened again. For years, historians treated the causes of World War II as separate from the causes of its predecessor. However, the lead-ups to the First and Second World Wars are inseparably linked. When Germany was united in the Franco-Prussian War of 1871 to 1872, it immediately cemented into a rich and powerful country. However, its late arrival meant that it did not gain the prestige and power it believed the nation deserved. It was kept out of the major trade networks and could not expand its colonial holdings. In short, Kaiser Wilhelm and the German government felt they had been disrespected. German frustration was only one cause of World War I, but it was a crucial one. However, the Wilhelmine bid to gain more influence failed, and the Entente powers in the war defeated them. But that only exacerbated the gap between German self-perception and their actual stature in the world. The Great War, as it was called at the time, was incredibly costly for the victors. They also blamed the Germans entirely for the outbreak of the war, even though there were other important causes. Therefore, the winning side, especially Britain and France, was hungry for revenge. As a result, the peace agreement that ended that war focused far more on punishing Germany than constructing a sustainable peace agreement. Therefore, the agreement included several causes that most Germans considered humiliating. The victors were not satisfied with blaming the defeated party for the war. They also sought compensation and forced Berlin to pay war reparations. The amounts of money involved were crippling, and France also demanded wildly excessive quantities of coal that were difficult for the vanquished party to provide. Perhaps most painfully, parts of Germany were stripped away and handed over to other countries. However, the United States worked to defang the agreement somewhat. Through their insistence, Germany was allowed to rebuild its economy and retain sovereignty. They also allowed the defeated side to maintain a small but potent military force. The peace agreement was poorly designed. It was not forgiving enough to bring Germany into the fold. However, it was not harsh enough to prevent the defeated nation from rebuilding and ultimately taking revenge. American President Woodrow Wilson identified some of the leading causes of World War I and aimed to prevent their recurrence. One measure he suggested was creating a League of Nations, not too different from the modern United Nations, which would help states resolve their conflicts. However, the enterprise was doomed from the start. Wilson was in the process of selling the idea to Congress and the American public when he fell victim to a stroke. The motion to join the international organization was defeated. The League released feeble condemnations when Germany repeatedly violated the Versailles Treaty. Japan ran amok in Manchuria, and Italy invaded Abyssinia. The neutered League of Nations was unable to prevent future conflicts. Rather than obey it or even respect it, nations such as Japan and Germany left the organization and ignored its resolutions. Germany was already a partial democracy before World War I. However, after the conflict, they adopted a fully democratic system with a capital in the city of Weimar. However, the catastrophic events of World War I had undermined faith in liberal democracy throughout the world. Many turned to communism, while others feared the specter of nationalization and redistribution and turned to fascism instead. Like many other countries, Weimar Germany was caught between both forces. Despite the reparations and rise of ideological extremism, the Weimar Republic limped on until the Great Depression. The ensuing inflation and poverty engulfed Germany and led to the demise of the regime. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party took advantage of the weakness of the Weimar government and blamed reparations for the state of the German economy. He also exploited the fear of communism and anti-Semitism prevalent amongst the middle class to cement support. These factors allowed the Nazis to pursue a policy of unparalleled racist expansionism. By the time Hitler and the Nazis had come to power, many citizens and leaders of democracies recognized the inequities of the Versailles Treaty. Indeed, the shock of seeing virulent nationalism and anti-Semitism take over the country hastened the long overdue recognition. This belated, though accurate, recognition ended up being problematic. The oppressive clauses of the agreement had unfairly burdened the Weimar Republic. The former Entente powers should have recognized the need to strengthen that government. However, once the Nazis were in power, the democracies required a strong policy to counter their ambitions. Instead, they laid down their guard and attempted to satisfy Hitler's demands to avoid war. The British policy was particularly problematic. Hitler made escalating demands and moves in the 1930s to strengthen the German military and territorial position. Though he had written his entire manifesto for massive expansionism in the book Mein Kampf, the leadership in London believed this was posturing. Successive governments, particularly the one led by Neville Chamberlain, turned a blind eye to increased German provocations. At first, the demands of the Nazi Führer seemed to fall under the category of revanchism, defined as the desire to reverse territorial losses. In 1936, the German military remilitarized the industrial Ruhr area in violation of the Versailles Treaty. The French and the paralyzed League of Nations' lack of reaction encouraged Hitler to continue his policy of brinkmanship. In 1938, Germany annexed Austria, which had never been part of it. However, many observers accepted it, as Austria and Germany shared a language and many cultural similarities. World War II was fought on two major fronts, the European theater and the Pacific one. Correspondingly, both areas played an important role in causing the conflict. Just like Germany, Japan was dissatisfied with the peace agreements ending World War I. They had fought, ironically enough, against Wilhelmine Germany. However, the sacrifices of the Japanese were not recognized by the Allies. A combination of frustration with their position in the world and the 1929 stock market crash's fallout pushed Japan towards a militaristic regime. Unwilling to continue to exist at the mercy of Western colonialism and their monopoly on trade, the island nation embarked on a mission to secure the resources and territory needed to establish their empire. Starting in 1931, the Japanese increased their influence in Manchuria, a province of China. By 1937, they refused to recognize Chinese sovereignty and launched a full-scale war against their larger neighbors. In 1938, Hitler pushed to annex the Sudetenland, a mountainous region in Czechoslovakia. Though ethnic Germans populated the area, it was essential for Czechoslovakian national security. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and French Premier Édouard Daladier negotiated with the Nazi government in Munich, agreeing to the German annexation of the area. The Führer agreed, formally waiving all future demands on the rest of the country. Chamberlain returned to England and announced he had made peace for our time. However, Hitler flagrantly violated the agreement. In March 1939, German troops marched into Prague and put an end to Czechoslovakian independence. The French and British knew they had been duped and prepared for war. The Soviet Union had been a close ally of Czechoslovakia. However, when the Western Allies abandoned the country, Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin adjusted his foreign policy. Moscow decided to sign a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany, doing so on August 23, 1939. That cleared the final and most blatant German provocation. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland on a flimsy pretext. By this point, no one believed their rationalizations. Both London and Paris declared war on Nazi Germany. The British and French policy of appeasement played a significant role in paving the road to war. However, more than anything else, it was the gaping open wound of World War I that guaranteed a grim sequel. To learn more about the history of World War II, check out our book, World War II, a captivating guide from beginning to end. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free Mythology Bundle ebook for free while it's still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.
I have a 134 IQ. I make less money than...
So now you can see as far as the origins of the World War I, World War II, we see as far as who are the players on the board and how these countries use these conflicts as far as to benefit for themselves, whether it's land expansion, resources, different things like that. So We're seeing the same things play out today. We're seeing the resources. We saw Venezuela, the oil, but no one understood the Iran. How is that connected to Venezuela? So that's a lot of stuff I want to get into as well. I want to get everyone up to speed on what's going on first.
For many years, Iran has defined itself in part by its opposition to my country. And there is, in fact, a tumultuous history between us.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
Relations between Iran and the United States have been mostly adversarial since the 1979 Islamic Revolution.
Here was not an embassy. It was a CIA center. This was a den of espionage, where they were plotting against the Iranian people.
But the seeds of animosity between the two countries were planted decades before. In 1952, Time magazine chose Iran's Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, as the 1951 Man of the Year for his efforts to nationalize his country's oil wealth, despite mounting economic pressure from Britain. Mossadegh was Iran's 35th Prime Minister, but his government succeeded in doing what no other Iranian leader was able to do before. He went against British interests in his country and deprived the Navy from securing oil supplies. To understand how important this chapter is in Iran's history and how it shaped its future and its relations with the US, we have to go back to the start of the century, when Iran was still known as Persia. Like many states in the region, Iranian oil wealth was monitored by foreign countries since its discovery. In 1901, the British government encouraged entrepreneur William Knox Darcy to invest in Persia's oil sector. The British brokered a deal between Darcy and the then Shah of Iran, Muzaffar al-Din. Darcy was granted a 60-year concession to prospect, transport, and sell petroleum, natural gas, asphalt, and minerals in 3/4 of the country. Under the deal, the Shah was given a lump sum of £20,000 in cash and a further £20,000 in shares, with Iran set to receive only 16% of the profits. The Darcy Agreement is known historically as the deal that compromised Iran's ability to benefit from its own oil wealth for decades. In 1908, a significant oil reserve was found at Masjid Suleiman in southwestern Iran. It was the world's largest oil discovery at the time, and it set off a wave of exploration that would change the region's future. After the discovery, the British government bought out the Darcy concession and the Anglo-Persian Oil Company that later became the British Petroleum Company, or BP, in 1954. In the coming era, navies and national economies would be powered by oil, replacing coal. Iranian oil helped the British Navy substantially during World War I. Winston Churchill, who secured the purchase of the shares from the Darcy concession, affirmed the importance of Iranian oil.
Fortune brought us a prize from fairyland beyond our wildest dreams.
For the next 50 years, Iran's vast oil reserves came under British control. That is, until Mossadegh came into power. After World War II, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi's rule was weakened by the rise of nationalist voices in the Iranian parliament. In March 1951, Iranian Prime Minister Haj Ali Resmara was assassinated by an ardent supporter of oil nationalization. Shortly after the assassination, nationalists in the Iranian Majlis, or parliament, nominated Mossadegh as their new prime minister. Fearing the strength of the nationalist movement, the Shah was forced to approve Mossadegh's nomination. And in May 1951, the Iranian parliament voted to nationalize the oil industry. Addressing his victory, Mossadegh said in a famous speech,
"Our long years of negotiations with foreign countries have yielded no results thus far. With the oil revenues, we could meet our entire budget and combat poverty, disease, and backwardness among our people."
The nationalization of Iranian oil was a blow to Britain's economic interests and to the survival of the British Empire.
Views of the great refinery at Abadan are sufficient evidence in themselves of its size and importance. This great undertaking, built up over many years by British skill and with British money, has now been evacuated in humiliating circumstances.
Britain took the matter to the International Court of Justice and placed an embargo on Iran's oil industry, making it impossible for Iran to sell its newly nationalized oil on the world market. The British hoped that economic pressure would threaten the popularity of Mossadegh and force him out of power. But Mossadegh was adamant.
Abroad, that strange politician Dr. Mossadegh continued on his strange way, refusing every offer for settlement of the oil dispute.
Desperate to regain control of Iran's oil industry, the British government approached the United States to assist in orchestrating a coup against Mossadegh. Harry Truman's administration rejected the idea of a coup in 1952, but when Dwight Eisenhower came to power in 1953, the British were able to persuade him by warning him of Mossadegh's communist alliances.
Demonstrations and riots in the streets of Tehran have followed the usual pattern in that troubled country. With shouts of "down with the Shah," fanatical leaders have been rallying the people in favor of Dr. Mossadegh.
The initial plan of toppling Mossadegh had failed, but the British and Americans eventually succeeded when they relied on royalists, the supporters of the exiled Shah. The country was divided between the Shah supporters and Mossadegh supporters. This is how pro-Shah demonstrators took over the streets of Tehran. Mobs set pro-Mossadegh newspapers on fire, General Fazollah Zahedi surrounded Mossadegh's residence with tanks, and protesters clashed with his guards. Mossadegh and his cabinet eventually surrendered, and General Fazollah Zahedi became Iran's new prime minister. The US then restored the pro-Western regime of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi to power. This was the first foreign intervention orchestrated by the newly formed CIA. The agency, with the help of British MI6, overthrew the first democratically elected government in the country. It was the beginning of the sequence of events that shaped Iran's relations with the US today.
In the military court at Tehran, where he's been on trial for treason, the Persian ex-premier, Dr. Mossadegh, demonstrates that he knows how to make an entrance.
Mossadegh was imprisoned for 3 years, then put under house arrest until his death. His family were forced to bury him at his residence. The overthrow of Mossadegh transformed Iran from a constitutional monarchy into a royal dictatorship, marking the beginning of public hostility towards the US. In 2000, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright acknowledged for the first time the US's role in the 1953 coup.
But the coup was clearly a setback for Iran's political development, and it is easy to see now why many Iranians continue to resent this intervention by America in their internal affairs.
After the coup of 1953, the oil was back under the control of the British, and the US gave increasing support to the Shah of Iran. In 2013, Iran's parliament approved a bill for the government to sue the US for its involvement in the coup. The bill followed the release of declassified documents offering details about how the CIA carried out the coup as an act of US foreign policy.
Campaign to install a pro-Western government in Iran. Target: Prime Minister Mossadegh and his government. Objectives: through legal or quasi-legal methods, to effect the fall of the Mossadegh government and to replace it with a pro-Western government under the Shah's leadership, with Zahedi as its prime minister.
In 1957, the US government helped the Shah establish its infamous secret police force known as Savak. Savak was tasked with monitoring the Shah's political opponents and even Iranians abroad. The agency tortured many Iranians, and its agents received training for interrogation tactics from the CIA. But the alliance between the Shah and the US turned a deaf ear to the growing anger in Iranian streets against the oppression of the Shah and US interference. In late December 1977, during a lavish New Year's Eve celebration, US President Jimmy Carter praised the Shah for making his country an island of stability.
Iran, because of the great leadership of the Shah, is an island of stability in one of the more troubled areas of the world.
Little more than a year later, animosity towards the Shah and US policies culminated in the Shah's ousting. Religious leader Ayatollah Khomeini, who played an integral part in the Shah overthrow, returned to the country after 15 years in exile. His return marked the beginning of more than 4 decades of animosity between Iran and the US. Since 1984, the US has designated Iran as a sponsor of terrorism. And although there were periods of negotiations and decreased tensions, changes in administration and Iran's proxy wars throughout the region have put the two countries at odds once again. Tensions between Tehran and Washington have been rising since the Trump administration withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018.
For far too long, all the way back to 1979 to be exact, nations have tolerated Iran's destructive and destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and beyond. Those days are over.
The US has taken several steps to put maximum pressure on the Iranian regime. The campaign aimed to curb Iran's nuclear program and regional reach by draining its economy. Iran responded to the maximum pressure campaign with a maximum resistance campaign. In retaliation, Iran showed off its ability to harm US interests in the region. In January 2020, the US assassinated Qasem Soleimani, Iran's most revered military commander. Soleimani was the head of Iran's Revolutionary Guards Quds Force. His controversial role in the war in Syria enhanced Iran's military presence in the region. President Hassan Rouhani drew parallels between Soleimani's assassination and the US-engineered coup of 1953.
This crime that the US committed is similar to the coup attempt and similar to the downing of Airbus passenger flight in the Persian Gulf. This crime will never be forgotten.
Trump said that by killing Soleimani, the US had saved many lives. But to many of these mourners, Soleimani, just like Mossadegh, was another national hero that the US removed from power against the will of the Iranian people.
So peace, Yodi, peace, Jazzy. So that I was just showing, like, the basis. Hold on. The basis of the history that's been going on between the US, the Iran, the Israel, all these things that are relations that we're now having these different talking points, like Iran's not important to the US, or Israel's not important to this, or the US takes care of Israel. That's just the little homie. The Israel has to do whatever the US says or anything like that. Like, we're not understanding who these players are, because you're trying to make these United States components American and then discard the history of when you're calling these people the devil and all these decisions that people are making. These are the same people making these decisions today. This is the same people that are pushing World War III. They're not, oh, these are the Americans that care about the original American and all this other stuff that I hear all across YouTube when they're talking about the fact that we're going into serious territory here. How did World War I start? How did World War II start? Well, World War I started from an assassination of an important political figure by a Serbian. And then Germany utilized those moves to make the next moves as far as what would benefit them. What did they need? A resource, land and expansion, imperialism. And they saw this as the right step to make that move. And we're seeing that right now the United States government is particularly making the same moves. We've seen this play on Venezuela. Venezuela has everything to do with this, and the oil tankers and everything that they were doing with the Venezuelan president. Up to now, when we're actually pushing for there to be countries joining into this war. So let's go to Venezuela for a little bit and remind people of what went down when it came to the Iran and Venezuelan relations.
The Venezuelan capital, Caracas, the queue at the petrol station can last for days.
This is the richest country in the world, and we should not be like this because there is wealth, there is oil, there is everything.
The shortages have plagued Venezuela for years, ever since its 1.3 million barrel a day refining network collapsed, which critics blame on underinvestment and mismanagement by the state oil company. Now, President Nicolas Maduro has turned to Iran for help, for fuel itself and chemicals to help get the oil industry back on track.
Those 5 ships are bringing gasoline. Regarding the technical support for the reactivation of the refinery, what the Venezuelan government asked us for in the past weeks was to bring input materials, catalysts, which Iran brought through the planes.
Ship tracking shows the first of the 5 tankers left the Iranian port city of Bandar Abbas in March. The first tanker, Fortune, is expected to arrive in Venezuela in the next few days. Iran is a longtime ally of Venezuela and fellow rival of the United States. Both countries' oil sectors are already under US sanctions. The White House says it's considering how to respond to the shipment.
This would be an example of the Iranian regime taking the wealth of the Iranian people and wasting it in Venezuela on Maduro.
The US is one of more than 60 countries trying to push Nicolas Maduro from power, recognizing opposition leader Juan Guaido as president. A force of US vessels, including Navy destroyers, patrol the Caribbean on what US officials say is an anti-drug mission. Venezuela sees the vessels as a threat and is sending its own military to escort the Iranian tankers through its territory.
In case this threat is materialized, it would constitute an actual armed aggression against a civilian Iranian vessel and against the Venezuelan people as a whole.
Is unlikely.
Nobody in Washington wants a war or any sort of conflict with Iran over Venezuela in the current circumstances. So although the U.S. Commander-in-Chief of the Southern Command has expressed concern over this, and Washington is clearly watching it closely, I think in the current circumstances, that's probably going to be the extent of it.
Venezuela and Iran say the trade is a win-win for both countries. Iran got much-needed gold, Venezuela the oil, and both got to send a message to the United States. Alexia O'Brien, Al Jazeera.
Imagine being able to...
So as you could see, that's from like 6 years ago. So, and that didn't age quite well from the analysts that said this won't progress into conflict. But we always know, or we should know, that usually these are things that are being set in place. They're doing things and years on end because they know that, yes, this is going to eventually lead to war or different things, especially when there's a resource on the line. So we see this play happen every time. There's a resource, whether it be a monopoly of a resource or seeking the actual resource in itself, then all of a sudden the person that has, or the country that has the resource, they are a threat of weapons of mass destruction or nuclear weapons that have to be put in check. So we're seeing this cycle that's happening over and over again, and yet people are arguing that this is different. People are arguing that, oh, this is the president that's finally for the people. There is no president that is ever going to be for the people. They know what agenda each president that they select is going to be on years prior to selecting them as the president, because they know of what they plan to do and where they plan to attack or what countries they plan to go for. So no different from where they placed Obama in the position so he could start utilizing military bases of the United States in certain parts of Africa, because that was the only untapped land at the time that didn't have the positioning of military bases to keep everyone in check. But then after the Obama administration, that was set in place. Everywhere that the United States military needs to be, a base is there. So we always see, as far as when they're choosing these presidents, there's always some kind of agenda. There's always something that they're going to push. It's never that the people came in and said, oh, we the people are saying that Trump is going to be the best for us. No, there's always a backhand agenda that's going on, and that we could actually see what's going on if we were just paying attention to years to come. So again, that was 6 years ago. Let's go to 2 years ago, where we start seeing the conflict arise between the United States and Iran.
For decades, Iran has interfered with maritime traffic in the Persian Gulf region, using sea mines, speedboats, helicopters, and other military means for political reasons. Around a quarter of the world's oil market goes through this strategically important economic artery.
Over the last several weeks, we have seen heightened tensions in the Persian Gulf.
There are cyber attacks on these ships. The Iranians have been known to turn off their tracking devices on their ships, which is illegal and extremely dangerous. And then they're actually impounding the ships.
The most recent incident involves 3 tankers seized by Iran over the course of several weeks.
This is definitely more of an escalation rather than a negotiation.
Iran alleges that one tanker had hit another vessel, something disputed by maritime tracking data that showed no such incident. Iran has said the other 2 tankers were seized over ownership disputes.
So what's going on behind the scenes with this is that, as we know, Iran oil is sanctioned, and so they are not permitted to be selling their oil on the global market. And so the United States is actually patrolling the waters for oil that's being illegally sold.
There's these shifting dynamics in which Iran has been upstarting its malign activities again, and it's going to disrupt not just our global economy, but our maritime security and awareness.
The U.S. also seized a tanker recently accused of transporting Iranian oil.
The United States seized the tanker containing Iranian oil because it's breaking the sanctions.
The Strait of Hormuz is a 21-mile-wide choke point that ships encounter before entering the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea from the Persian Gulf, which itself is a critical artery for energy products worldwide. The U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, is responsible for maintaining a secure environment for the U.S., allies, and partners in the region.
What's truly problematic about this is if the Iranian malignant activity rises to a certain level, insurers will truly problematic about this.
5th Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain.
Now, I wanted to go back because just want to point this out. I know people probably have been coming in as far. Peace to you, Milestone Stock. So you haven't been here since the beginning. I showed as far because people were saying that, oh, this isn't real. There is no war. There will be some kind of attack on American military base if we were really at war with Iran. Well, I showed that they've already attacked Bahrain. Iran did. They sent their missiles. So you already have Americans that were taking videos from the site as far as what's going on with the missiles. And they try to say that they've intercepted all the missiles or anything. But that's why it's important to actually utilize different sources, different news outlets, because sometimes you're not getting the full picture if you just focus on one side of the news sector. So I like to look into a lot of different things. But yes, so Bahrain has already been sent nuclear or missile attacks from Iran.
Is responsible for maintaining a secure environment for the U.S., allies, and partners in the region.
What's truly problematic about this is if the Iranian malignant activity rises to a certain level, insurers will stop insuring these vessels coming in and out of the Gulf, and that's going to be extremely disruptive for international energy markets.
Iran has threatened to close the strait in the event of a conflict which could rock the global economy. With a shadow war being fought between Iran and the U.S. over sanctions related to the Iranian nuclear program, could maritime traffic in the Gulf get caught in the crossfire?
Back in 1980, then President Carter laid out what is referred to as the Carter Doctrine in his State of the Union address that year, which is that the United States will guarantee the free flow of energy out of the Gulf.
After USS Samuel B. Roberts hit the mine, President Reagan ordered U.S. forces to strike back.
In the late 1980s, the U.S. fought a brief but violent battle over Iran mining the Persian Gulf during the Iran-Iraq War.
They must know that we will protect our ships, and if they threaten us, they'll pay a price.
In the decades since, Iran has invested heavily in speedboats, sea mines, drones, and missiles in an effort to offset the U.S. technological advantage in the region.
Over the last several weeks, we have seen an increase in the tensions in the Persian Gulf, very reminiscent, if you will, of what happened in the 1980s. And as a result, we are seeing what we saw in the 1980s, where the U.S. Navy has now announced that they are going to be patrolling the waters even more closely to make sure that the flow of oil is secure.
Close to 20 million barrels of crude oil per day go through the Strait of Hormuz. and Iran is the origin point for around 1.2 million barrels by itself. Where this Iranian oil ends up can be murky, but private analysts estimate that a large volume is ending up in China, despite a lack of corresponding customs data. At the start of the maximum pressure campaign, which saw the Trump administration levy heavy sanctions on Iran in an attempt to get a new nuclear deal, Iran saw its GDP growth drop to negative 1.8% in 2018. By 2022, Iran had a growth rate of 2.8%, which was still a far cry from the 2016 high of 8.8%. One of the most important commodities to transit the Gulf is oil, and the long-term disruption to the crude supply could have a devastating impact on global trade, even with U.S. energy production in a much better position than it was in the 1980s.
The United States is no longer a supplicant to the Gulf for imports. We are one of the world's big three energy producers, along with Russia and Saudi Arabia. So we're in a completely different posture. And in a way, this is an opportunity for us to review what we are putting into security for the Gulf and why we're doing it when their lead export market is now China, not the United States.
The reason why they're escalating now is because of the impact of the sanctions.
Despite sanctions, Iranian oil still is in high demand, which presents both targets for U.S. enforcement, but also opportunity for Iran to get much-needed hard currency to support their crippled economy. The Trump administration, in an effort to get more concessions out of Iran over their nuclear program, enacted what was known as the Maximum Pressure Campaign. This included a variety of economic sanctions and other methods to compel Iran back to the table.
These tanker seizures, whether this is a sheer coincidence or not, is happening around the time that we have just passed the 5-year anniversary of the Trump administration withdrawing from the nuclear deal. I think the timing of this is very compelling in that Iran is trying to first and foremost, preserve its regime. And by doing so, they want to continue trying to advance their nuclear weapons program.
The failure to forge a new nuclear deal has left a dark cloud over U.S.-Iranian relations. And now that there are reports of Iranian nuclear enrichment nearing what is known as the breakout stage, where the country would be in a position to rapidly develop a nuclear weapon, things are getting even more complicated.
Getting back in some version of the Obama-era nuclear deal has been a top priority for President Biden, and they've tried mightily to reason with both the Iranians and the Russians through the negotiations in Geneva. I, for one, am somewhat skeptical that you could reason with either party, but they've tried. And certainly their very permissive attitude toward both the shipping harassment and the sanctions-busting smuggling, I think, has been part of their effort to keep the Iranians engaged, and also, quite frankly, to try to keep energy prices down here in the United States.
When important maritime regions become difficult to navigate, it can impact trade globally.
I would say I would not be that worried because China is getting their oil from Iran. And so when you have a very large country buying up this oil, it is not in the best interest for Iran to shut down the Strait of Hormuz.
Abraham Accords caucus members, they have actually introduced a bill called the Maritime Act to the floor to hopefully get something going from the congressional side of things.
The U.S. has announced that it's moving more forces into the region to reinforce the Fifth Fleet.
We have the Fifth Fleet, one of our largest naval installations at Manama, which is the capital of Bahrain.
However, what comes next depends entirely on what happens in the Gulf.
I think we need to review our strategy for them, but having them there is extremely useful. But at the same time, when you do beef up your presence, you increase your size as a target. And with the Iranians feeling quite emboldened now, one has to worry about the possibility that they will lash out on a larger scale.
And I totally agree, Brother Nazir. Multi-ethnic networks as far as newscasting, different things, even looking at what the opposite side says, the Iranian news versus the United States news and different things, because what you want to do is piece together the truth. So we see here as far as them saying all the components, and if you're keeping up right now, they're already talking about shutting down the Strait of Hormuz as we speak because of the conflicts that are going. So that's going to cause even more people to get into the conflict. But I wanted to do a funny break because Dave Chappelle is like really before his time and he's a genius. And this is funny, but also just look at the comparison, the parallels, because this is so true. This is what happens. So yes, that was funny, but look how that started. Exact same thing. Um and this is, during the Bush presidency. Everybody remembers the Afghani-Iraqi war. It started off saying they need a regime change. So we need to go out and take out the president. Then we get a president or a supreme leader assassination like we just had right now. After that, that leads to civil unrest. Trump is already saying how he's discussing the new leaders that are the potentials to be taking over Iran currently and different things like that. But we'll see that the civil unrest only continues. As we can see, the launches and the attacks have already gone on Qatar, on Israel, on Dubai, all across the Middle East, as far as you see the teaming up of Russia, China with Iran, and the allies of the U.S. going on the side with Israel and the U.S. when it comes to this. So everything is preparing for it to be the exact same. My question is, since everyone had so much disdain, especially in the Black community, for President Bush at the time, mainly because of how he dealt with Katrina. But when we're seeing someone like Trump do the same exact playbook, showing you that there is a playbook, showing you that's what these governments do. They put a president in place and then they have the same exact, oh, this is a terrorist. We need to take out this regime. There needs to be a regime change, assassination. After the assassination, there's civil unrest, and then you see us going into war. When you see this exact matrix loop, how can you say anything is different? How can you say that this is the president that's going to change all the rest of the presidents and finally be working on the people's behalf? We can see that that's not the case, that they're doing the same thing that they've always done. So what we need to do is really evaluate what's going on and how we should move forward. But I guess there'll always be these people that are just so gullible, that want to believe everything of the government or want to be so patriotic that they're stupid and they're not even seeing what's going on, or saying, oh, America, we got this, we gonna win no matter what. Well, what is it to even win when we're talking about going to World War III? Yes, we may not be the overall losers, but in any case of these wars, we're definitely going to see the oil prices go up exponentially through this time, just like we saw in the Iraqi war. We're going to see years and years of warring with no resolution, with civil unrest, as far as us being over there and trying to say we're going to establish a new regime that's healthy and for democracy or anything like that, while we see thousands of people dying, and really close to millions when you're talking about both sides of the coin. When you're talking about all the people on the Western side, all the people on the Middle East side, we're going to have millions of casualties, and we may see some kind of benefit. But overall, when you look back in Iraq, that wasn't one. We didn't win that. We just had to end it. George Bush was a neocon Reno. You would have to come up here, Bad Hombre. I don't know what language that is to even start and be like what you're talking about. But yeah, so we just see these things happening over and over again. I don't understand how people are not and can't peep the plays by this point, especially since in most of our lifetime we've lived at least this happening how many times now? And for some of y'all, even more times. But at least this has been over 10 times in our lifetime where we've seen stuff like this go down. So how do we not peep the plays? How do we not know what's going on? How do we not know that this is about other things than they're telling us what it's about at this point in our lives? So let me go ahead and I had another video of the Venezuela and Iran alliance so we can see a little bit more and deeper of why did Trump target Venezuela and Iran in the first place.
In Latin America. In June 2022, the presidents of Venezuela and Iran signed a 20-year partnership agreement to promote cooperation between the two countries. But why would the Iranian regime be interested in a country so far from home? This is actually nothing new. Iran's interest in embedding itself in a place like Venezuela is twofold. One, Venezuela's proximity to the United States, and two, the financial opportunities of the South American drug trade. The relationship between Iran and Venezuela has become increasingly strong ever since Hugo Chavez began his presidency in 1999. The two governments' shared animosity for the United States gave them common ground for cooperation, and between 2000 and 2012, dozens of diplomatic visits gave rise to hundreds of agreements in the areas of energy, tourism, agriculture, engineering, defense, and more. By 2012, Iran's investments and loans in Venezuela were valued at $15 billion. The Iranian government was sending Venezuela oil and gas, as well as civilian resources like cars and military infrastructure like drones. As both countries repeatedly came under new U.S. sanctions, Iran and Venezuela's strategic partnership continued to grow, with current presidents Raisi and Maduro aiming last year to increase bilateral trade from $3 billion to $20 billion.
ارتباط بین ایران و ونزوئلا یک ارتباط راهبردی است که دو کشور رو که از منافع مشترک، نگاه مشترک، دشمن مشترک.
Because of its close proximity to the U.S., Iran uses Venezuela as its home base in South America. Iran delivers weapons to Venezuela by air and sea that are very well capable of hitting U.S. territory. For example, the Iranian Mohajer 6 UAV that was displayed during a recent military parade in Venezuela has a flight time of 12 hours and a range of 1,200 miles, placing U.S. cities like Miami well within striking distance. Iranian Zulfajr boats armed with anti-ship missiles currently sit off the coast of northwest Venezuela. Even though these boats are not meant to go very far into the ocean, the missiles they carry are. Iran turned Venezuela into a land bridge to the extensive South American drug trade network in countries like Brazil, Colombia, Bolivia, and Mexico, among others. By sending operatives to South America from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and its proxy military in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah, Iran creates financial opportunities abroad to fund its global terror machine locally. In 2018, for example, Hezbollah's treasurer, Assad Ahmed Barakat, was arrested in the triple frontier between Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. Barakat was a top figure in Hezbollah's drug trafficking and money laundering, and was the key financier of the deadliest terrorist attack in Argentina's history, the 1994 bombing of the Jewish Community Center. And just last year, Iranian President Raisi made visits to Cuba and Nicaragua to work on strengthening Iran's ties to their other allies in Latin America. Even though Venezuela is 7,000 miles away from the Middle East, Iran and Venezuela see themselves as part of the same team, enabling Iran to threaten the U.S. from close by and presenting an opportunity for Iran to expand its presence in the region. The Venezuela-Iran alliance is just one part of Iran's axis of terror and ongoing attempts to destabilize the Western world.
I hate Reno, Susan Collins, Mitch McConnell, etc., and George Bush. Well, okay, so then answer me this, Bad Hombre. If you hate the Renos, you say George Bush is a Reno. What's the difference of what Trump is doing from what George Bush did in Iraq? How is this different? How is this going to be a better situation for the United States as a whole, being in this conflict with Iran, than what the conflict of Iraq did? Because all that did was we lost people. I think some people, Dick Cheney, I'm not sure, maybe Warren Buffett, some companies made some money through the process for sure, but overall it's not seen as a war that we definitively won. It's not seen as something like, oh, the United States gained their objectives. It was just a long war that Obama ended up being like, okay, we just need to get out of Iraq at this point, in Afghanistan. We've been here too long, and lower taxes and smaller government. For who? For us? For Iran? You're saying Trump is establishing lower taxes and smaller government? But yeah, Obama just had to go out and be like, this is just this is futile at this point. We just have to escape this. And I don't see how this is any better, especially it definitely looks like, I'm not saying that Venezuela is still militarized or anything. It looks like they definitely did their purpose of demilitarizing the Venezuelan zone, but that is really close for comfort. So when we're talking about going into a World War III in an aspect that there has been no real attacks or a real war effort since like the Civil War here, other than what they call 9/11, but we won't get into the conspiracies of 9/11, but just that there hasn't been that here. Are we opening it up where that is going to happen here? It's inevitable that World War III is going to touch the United States of America. Yes, lower taxes for us, I'm guessing that you're saying. And that's from the war in Iran, that's going to establish some lower taxes for us? Or just domestically? I'm not debating. I mean, I don't see overall as far as if Trump is going to be a good domestic president. I think for the most part, the conspiracist in me, when I'm looking at it and I know the president is not something that is just in charge of the United States government and we're not just following everything the president says. The president has its own bosses and different things, so they have their own agendas. Usually when there is a president like this that ends up pushing towards war efforts or something as big as like World War III or like the Korean War that happened with Lyndon B. Johnson, or sorry, the Vietnam War with Lyndon B. Johnson, he's still overall seen as a great domestic president that had great domestic policies for the people internally and different things. And I don't even think they even tear down cost of living or anything like that during his presidency. But the Vietnam War definitely tarnished how people look at him. So I think it could be the same, similar. Trump will still go ahead and do a lot of things that will benefit the American citizens domestically. He'll probably move forward with lower taxes. We may get a bigger check when it comes down to tax seasons and different things like that. But overall, when we're talking about our strength, our alliances on the other side, what losses are we going to take here? Because there are going to be some losses. Nixon was better than who? Lyndon B. Johnson or Trump? But hold on, let me get the next video. Yeah, Nixon's better than Lyndon B. Johnson as far, I mean, obviously Watergate took him down. But again, that's what I'm saying. It's never like they don't do anything or good, even when you have like a disdain for any of these presidents. But I see it as they always had these agendas in the forefront. People are the electoral college and the associated corporations that are running the electoral college. There's a reason they pick a person, and they know why they're picking a person to be the president prior to them picking them. They already had their set of itinerary that what their 4 years is going to look like because they have what they want them to establish. But okay, let's go ahead and see. This is what Putin has said after the supreme leader's death in Iran.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin has sharply condemned the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, calling it a cynical murder that violates all standards of human morality and international law. Putin expressed deep condolences to the Iranian people, government, and Khamenei's family, stressing the international ramifications of the act.
Please accept my deepest condolences in connection with the assassination of the Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, committed in cynical violation of all norms of human morality and international law.
Putin described Khamenei as an outstanding statesman who strengthened Iran-Russia ties, emphasizing his role in shaping the Middle East and promoting bilateral cooperation. The Russian leader underscored that the killing could destabilize the region, with consequences far beyond Iran's borders.
In Russia, Khamenei will be remembered as an outstanding statesman who made a significant contribution to the development of relations between the two countries, Putin stated. The Russian leader conveyed words of sincere sympathy and support to the family and friends of the slain Khamenei, the government, and the entire people of Iran.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin has so far refrained from publicly commenting on the recent US-Israeli strikes on Iran, leaving analysts to read between the lines of Moscow's next move. Senior Russian officials have cautioned that the strikes risk pushing the region toward a nuclear crisis and could escalate tensions far beyond the Middle East.
Despite Tehran's willingness to engage in the diplomatic process, it is once again being stabbed in the back. Moreover, the fact that Washington has been steadily increasing its military presence in the region for so long only confirms the fact that the aggression against Iran was premeditated. The actions of the United States and Israel risk turning into a humanitarian and economic catastrophe. The threats to nuclear, physical nuclear, and radiological safety are of particular concern once again. The statements made today by US President Donald Trump that this operation is aimed at preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons are not justified. Tehran has consistently stated that it has no such plans and complies with its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Analysts suggest Putin's statement is both a moral condemnation and a strategic warning to the US and Israel. Moscow's support signals potential alignment with Tehran in political, military, or diplomatic arenas, increasing the risk of coordinated pushback against Western actions in the region.
So y'all, Trump that can't do no wrong, people. And salute MacD. What are y'all saying when Putin says these things? When they're like consequences are gonna go far beyond just sticking to the Middle East or really threatening to get involved and different things like that. Are y'all saying, oh, there's nothing to be concerned about? Who is Russia or anything like that? Are y'all thinking that Trump is going to be able to negotiate his way out of this with other alliances? Y'all can put that in the chat. And again, feel free to hit the panel. This is an open panel. But yeah, what do you guys think about that? Like, are y'all just trusting in Trump that he is going to be able to get peaceful negotiations out of this? Also, Brother Nazir was talking about earlier, and I know Yodi had mentioned this as well as President Trump saying that he would be the one that ends wars forever and there would never be a war and there would be no need for violence or anything like that, of what he was saying when he was campaigning. But all that's bullshit. All of them always campaign and say there won't be a war. I can be able to negotiate different things like that. But again, war efforts are based on resources. If there is a resource that is up to question for a particular country or anything once, then war will always be on the table because war is about resources. But while you all are contemplating about that to really see, what y'all are feeling like Trump can be able to do as he moves forward. Let's look at this. This is from a couple years back, but this is just showing how they're developing their relationships between China and Russia. And now we see both China and Russia stepping to the table when it comes to the United States.
The meeting in Moscow between China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov marks another formal step in the strategic alignment between the two governments. The talks took place on December 2nd, 2025, with both sides emphasizing continuity, coordination, and a shared approach to global political developments. The Russian Foreign Ministry released the official footage and transcript of the statements delivered after the meeting. Wang Yi, speaking in Mandarin, framed the relationship as entering what he called a new phase. In his remarks, he described the ties between Beijing and Moscow as moving into a new historical era. He said the direction of cooperation has been shaped by what he called consensus between the two heads of state, Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Wang Yi reaffirmed what has become one of the consistent pillars of Chinese diplomacy in relation to Russia, a stated commitment to expanded strategic coordination in international affairs. He said the Chinese government intends to strengthen what he called mutual support, deepen coordination across global issues, and widen cooperation intended to bring economic benefits to both countries. In the opening part of his statement, Wang Yi referenced what he called a shared responsibility between China and Russia regarding how the events of the Second World War and the post-war framework of international institutions are interpreted today. He said the presidents of the two countries had agreed to jointly preserve what he called the achievements of the war and the post-war order. Wang Yi stated, in particular, the leaders of the two countries unanimously agreed to jointly preserve the achievements of World War II and the post-war international order, and to oppose any retrograde or counter-trend attempt to overturn the judgment on aggression. This has demonstrated to the whole world our powerful voice in the defense of international justice and fairness. This language continues a recurring theme in public messaging by both governments, which have increasingly drawn parallels between their current diplomatic positions and historical narratives related to the outcome of the war and the institutions formed afterward. Wang Yi then turned to the future trajectory of bilateral ties. He said that China's assessment is that relations with Russia are now entering a new historical era, and that Beijing intends to implement decisions previously reached by Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. He said the two countries seek to build what he called stronger mutual support and more active strategic coordination. He emphasized cooperation aimed at practical benefits. He stated, "The development of China-Russia relations is entering a new historical era. We are ready to work with the Russian side to fully implement the important consensus reached by the two heads of state. Through stronger mutual support, more vigorous strategic coordination, and more enterprising, mutually beneficial cooperation, we will bring more benefits to the people of both countries and promote the development of a fairer and more equitable international order." Wang Yi's comments reflect Beijing's consistent public framing of its partnership with Moscow as stable, long-term, and rooted in state-to-state alignment rather than short-term geopolitical shifts. Chinese officials have repeatedly described the partnership as non-allied, non-confrontational, and not directed against any third party, while simultaneously signaling that the two governments view many international challenges through similar lenses. The meeting in Moscow follows a series of high-level diplomatic exchanges this year. China and Russia have increased the frequency of ministerial visits, joint statements, and policy consultations. Officials from both countries have emphasized coordination on global governance reforms, economic cooperation, and the development of alternative financial and political mechanisms not centered on Western institutions. In parallel, trade between the two countries has expanded significantly in recent years. China remains Russia's largest trading partner, and Russia has increased its exports of energy resources to China. Following the sweeping Western sanctions imposed on Russia in earlier years, the Russian government has continued to diversify trade flows toward Asian markets, with China occupying the central position in that adjustment. At the same time, Chinese imports of Russian energy have become a key component of bilateral economic ties. Both governments have highlighted the role of cross-border infrastructure, including oil and gas pipelines, as part of long-term cooperation. Diplomatic engagement between Beijing and Moscow has also grown in the fields of security, dialogue, and international coordination. Russia and China have repeatedly aligned their positions on major resolutions within the United Nations Security Council. Both have called for what they describe as a more multipolar international system and have criticized policies that they say contribute to bloc confrontation. Wang Yi's visit to Moscow comes at a time when the geopolitical environment remains characterized by heightened rivalry between major powers, with both China and Russia facing pressure from the United States and several European governments over their respective foreign policies. In recent years, both Beijing and Moscow have publicly rejected Western criticism of their domestic governance, economic practices, and international conduct. In his Moscow remarks, Wang Yi did not directly reference specific Western countries. Instead, he framed the bilateral partnership as an anchor of stability and a model of state-to-state cooperation based on mutual interests. He said that China intends to carry forward what he described as fair and just principles in global affairs in coordination with Russia. The meeting concluded without the announcement of new major agreements. However, both sides signaled commitment to continuing cooperation across diplomatic, economic, security, and multilateral institutions. Russian officials have emphasized in previous statements that cooperation with China remains one of Moscow's highest foreign policy priorities. China, for its part, has repeatedly stated that relations with Russia are rooted in what it calls a strategic foundation formed by the two heads of state. Beijing has also described the partnership as playing a stabilizing role in global affairs. The public messaging from the Moscow meeting remains consistent with that longer-term narrative. Wang Yi's comments reiterated themes that have formed the core of Chinese diplomacy in relation to Russia over the past decade: respect for sovereignty, opposition to what Beijing sees as unilateral sanctions, support for reforms in international systems, and alignment on how global security challenges are interpreted. During the press availability, Wang Yi focused largely on describing the principles guiding the next phase of cooperation. He did not reveal new policy initiatives or concrete deliverables, but emphasized continuity and the direction set by national leadership. China, he said, will work with Russia to implement agreements already reached. The statement from Wang.
So as y'all can see, they've already set up themselves as far as to fight off the sanctions, the different things that the Western side likes to do in these times, kind of cut off access to other people. They've already been building against all that to this point. So a lot of the same tools that they would be able to use in other times, as far as with these sanctions, dictating where trade is going to go or anything like that, we're not going to be able to do currently. But it's just interesting to see. I did see the time. I thought it was actually earlier. Thought I had a lot more time, but I'll have to go. But we'll definitely have to do a part 2. I don't know if I'm going to go on tomorrow to do the part 2 or Tuesday, but just keep on the lookout because we definitely got to get more into this with these relationships between China and Russia. If this is really a World War III that's coming on, and why people are so oblivious, even if it is, that they're going to support Trump no matter what. Like, that's their wise zaddy. So I just want to get people's mindsets on that and seeing of what's to be, what's to come, and are they saying there's nothing to worry about? World War III will happen and we'll be fine, or if they have plans as far as to benefit from any kind of war efforts that are coming on, or thinking that negotiations will happen to cease all war efforts and to bring peace. I don't know. Next Sunday, pull up to Clubhouse for sure. Next Sunday, I will. Around this time, Green Pill. But y'all, peace. Thank y'all for coming out. Green Pill, Blad Umbre. Be on the lookout because I definitely will be bringing this back so we can talk more about this. And I'm sure by the next time I'm talking about this, there'll be even more so stuff to talk about because it's deep right now with the history, with what's happening with the war in Iran. Okay, yeah, I'll be at Clubhouse next Sunday around the time. So peace, everyone. Peace and love.